Word, of the fact that, with the Biden administration, we have an open border policy. Come on in.
And I'm not just unhappy with the cowboys who were running down Haitians and using their reins to whip them.
President Biden's immigration policy getting hammered by members of Congress on both the right and left. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Guy Benson of Fox News Radio, Catherine Lucy, who covers the White House for the Wall Street Journal, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Catherine, how worried is the Biden White House about the situation at the border, which is bad, and particularly these last 2 weeks seem to be getting worse? How worried are they about the political fallout, and do they have any answers?
Well, Chris, they're coming under heavy criticism, as we just saw, from both parties. Republicans arguing that the policies are too permissive, Democrats frustrated about the evacuation flights and the images of these agents at the border. You saw Secretary Mayorkas earlier in this program. They're trying to argue that they are handling it, that they are moving forward. But certainly President Biden on Friday, said that he takes responsibility for the situation at the border. He spoke about the images of these agents being outrageous. I think the big thing to think about as we look forward here is that these pressures aren't going to go away, that they're going to continue to deal with this. They don't have a lot of political support or allies really on the left or the right now. And for the president, this moment is really testing his promise of a more humane immigration policy.
Guy, the numbers are stunning. More than 1 million encounters with people coming over the border since Joe Biden took office. And in 17 days, 30,000 Haitians coming across the border just in Del Rio, Texas.
And this week, your guest, Secretary Mayorkas, testified that the border is secure. Those are his words, which ring completely hollow. Frankly, it's sort of an insulting assertion for him to make, but that's the talking point from an administration that still won't call this a crisis. The north of 1 million encounters that you cited, Chris, does not even include the tens of thousands of known gotaways, so-called, each month. And I found it very interesting in listening to that exchange that you had with the secretary earlier. You asked him about the agents on horseback, who I think have been smeared with this whipping allegation that is not supported by the evidence. He said he didn't want to get into it. He wouldn't say if they even violated any protocol or training pending the investigation. But his boss, the president this week, in the soundbite that you played, said that they will pay for the horrifying behavior. So that's a very different answer, much less circumspect than the answer you got from the secretary this morning.
Juan, I want to talk about this issue that Catherine raised about Biden wanting a policy that's more humane. Is it humane? I know you were no fan of President Trump's immigration policy, but is it humane to create a policy that allows, that creates magnets so that you end up with 30,000 people crossing the border at Del Rio, Texas, and huddling under that bridge in squalid conditions?
Well, Chris, I don't think that it's the case that President Biden has created a magnet with his immigration policy. I think that it's clearly the case that his tone is far different than the grotesque kind of inhumane rhetoric we heard from President Trump, ripping families apart and the like, and talking about a wall. But to Democrats and Republicans, I think everyone will tell you that, in fact, Biden's policies on immigrations are far closer to Trump's in terms of the aggressive policing, the high number of people who are deported, who are put out, than certainly the Democrats are comfortable with. We saw that this week. That's why you're saying both sides are critical of Biden's policies. But again, remember, we saw surges previous to this, previous to Biden. Right now, the Haitians are fleeing desperate situations, some of it sort of the global economic consequence of COVID and the natural catastrophe that's hit Haiti. But all of that is to say that you have an immigrant situation where in this country now, people who have legitimate cases for asylum, people who are desperate and fleeing violence or catastrophe, are getting turned back in many cases. And unlike Trump, the system is not being starved, so they're being processed, and then people say you have a crisis. Well, the fact is, again, that those people under law should be given their process. Congress should act if they want to change the law.
All right, let's turn, in the time we have left in this segment, to another big story, and that was the final approval for Pfizer vaccines for certain groups of people, starting right away after 6 months. Here was President Biden on all of that this week.
The majority of Americans who were fully vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine are now able to receive the booster shot 6 months after they've received their second shot. 6 months after you receive the second shot, you're eligible.
Catherine, there certainly were some bumps in the road. First, the president said it would start on September 20th. He said it would be for everybody who'd been vaccinated. It's been delayed. It's been constricted. Does the Biden White House think that in the end, folks are going to forget all of those bumps and just be happy they can get another booster?
Well, that's the question, right, Chris? I mean, we know from polling that booster shots are widely popular with vaccinated Americans. But we also have heard in our reporting from some administration officials concern that this back and forth and the sort of shifting message, could create confusion among Americans. And so that's a real issue, and that has opened them up to some criticism. Obviously, the president earlier suggesting that this would be more widely available. The White House says that they always try to make clear that they would wait for the final, scientific ruling. But this has raised questions about, whether he is sort of keeping his promise to follow the science here.
People, understandably, well, it started off at 6 trillion, now it's 3.5 trillion, now is it going to be 2.9? It's going to be zero.
President Biden trying to play down the cost of his massive social spending plan. And we're back now with the panel one. This is the new White House line that they have rolled out. Instead of defending the $3.5 trillion tax and spending bill, the new argument is, well, it's going to be zero because they're going to pay for it by raising taxes. But whether you pay for it by taxes or by borrowing, it's still a $3.5 trillion tax and spending bill is still a $3.5 trillion tax and spending bill.
Yeah, but of course they're talking, Chris, in terms of the debt and the deficit, and it doesn't, in fact, raise the debt or the deficit. You look back, obviously the Democrats are at the Trump years, and you saw a $7 trillion hike in terms of debt and deficit because it wasn't paid for, and the consequence was that, we have an escalating debt and deficit that it's a concern to every economist in the world. Right now, what the Biden people are saying is you can raise the corporate tax. I think it's from 21 now to 25. That's less than it's been for the last 30 years. And you can raise taxes on people who make more than $400,000. And at this time of high economic inequity, that's very popular with the American people. So I don't think that you can argue about zero, but you can't argue that it has some impact on the debt, and that's the Biden point.
Catherine, we should point out, first of all, that on another Sunday talk show this morning, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that she expressed real confidence that this week that the House will pass the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure plan. Now, President Biden, on your beat, the White House, met with all the factions in the Democratic Party, House and Senate, liberals and moderates, trying to work both on bipartisan infrastructure and also on this, yes, I'm not going to call it the zero tax and spending bill, but the $3.5 trillion tax and spending bill. How confident are they? Are they as confident as Nancy Pelosi they're going to get the infrastructure bill through this week and the $3.5 trillion soon to follow?
Well, certainly it's crunch time for all of this. I mean, this is going to be a massive week for the president's agenda and, whether his domestic plans can move forward. The White House is privately still, saying they're optimistic. They feel good about the way his talks went last week. He met obviously with the leaders, but also with key moderates and progressives. We know that, he has been making clear that some flexibility on the overall number. And when he met with moderates, he spoke about possibly, they discussed whether this could go to less than $3 trillion. So they are still negotiating. I mean, this is not done yet, but they are pleased that things are still moving, that they are still talking. Obviously, Pelosi is expressing a lot of confidence. But there are still clear divides. There are still policy divides that are not resolved. This is a very heavy lift to try and do all of these things this week. And we're going to see it's really going to be a test of the president's negotiating and managing skills within his party. He ran as someone who is a veteran lawmaker who could really manage tough situations like this. So we're going to see how he does.
You know, as big as these two bills are, that's not the real deadline this week. The immediate deadline is at 12:01 a.m. on Friday morning. The U.S. federal government runs out of money unless they at least pass a continuing resolution to keep it funded. And Democrats have decided to link the government funding bill with another measure that would raise the debt limit because the government is in danger of defaulting on its debt probably sometime in mid to late October. The Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, has made it pretty clear he don't like this idea. Take a look.
If Washington Democrats want to jam through trillions of dollars in reckless spending all by themselves, they can raise the debt limit all by themselves.
Guy, it may be smart politics, but given the fact that much of the debt that is the debt limit would be raised to deal with was incurred under President Trump, isn't it irresponsible for Mitch McConnell to say, we're wiping our hands of raising the debt limit?
Well, it's a political strategy, Chris, in a political town that is currently completely run by the other party, the Democratic Party. Far be it from me to question the strategy and the tactics of Mitch McConnell. Generally, I would say he has thought about these things harder and longer than I have, or most people have, and he's a pretty brilliant and shrewd tactician. I would say overall, I think those things are going to happen. The government's going to be funded. The debt ceiling is going to be raised. The Democrats can do those things on their own if they choose to prioritize them. I'm most interested to see the sequencing and the total dollar amounts on the infrastructure bill that's bipartisan. When that gets voted on, does it come first? Does it come second? And then on reconciliation, does that top line number come down far enough to assuage the moderates where they get something across the finish line? My suspicion is, knowing Nancy Pelosi's track record of whipping votes, my suspicion is they will get there. I don't know where there is, what exactly it's going to look like, but I am less confident in that prediction than I was even a few weeks ago because the fault lines very much exist, and it seems like Pelosi recognizes this thing could fall apart, so she set up this pressure cooker of a week with everything on the table this coming week with a big high-stakes meeting tomorrow among House Democrats in the evening. It will be fascinating to watch, and I think the McConnell position is Republicans should do nothing to throw a lifeline to the Democrats so long as they are sort of at war or at least in conflict with one another.
One, I want to pick up on something that Guy said. You would have gone broke a long time ago betting against Mitch McConnell and his mastery of the process. Whether you think it's fair or not, in the end, will Democrats have to raise the debt ceiling on their own?
It looks that way, Chris, because I think McConnell wants leverage to run a political ad blaming the Democrats and making them into big spenders. By the way, note, he has no demands as to, you should do this or do that so Republicans can cooperate and the government can continue to function. I think this is an example where Republicans know, look, we've done this in the past for other presidents, Republican and Democrats. They know what's right, but right now they're all about the politics.
What an amazing thing, the politics in Washington, D.C., and it says something to you folks that we're so excited by this pressure cooker of budget bills in Congress this week. Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday. Up next,